insulin resistance. Tell us a little bit more about it and why it's so crucial when it comes to our health.
So insulin resistance is a very complex topic, and this is one of the most critical concepts I think doctors and patients need to understand in a way that's really simple so they can apply their daily lifestyle to it. And I think the way I'd want to start off with it to really keep it simple is when we consume carbohydrates, our body breaks it down into glucose. And one of the most compelling images I use in talks and in my book is I tell people, think of that glucose molecule as being a car, and you've got 3 parking lots in your body. There's more than 3 parking lots, but the 3 major ones are your muscle lot, your liver lot, and your fat parking lot. And in an ideal situation, especially after meals, we want that glucose car to roll into your muscle lot so your muscle can burn that for fuel, for energy. And the way that car gets inside that muscle is by using the hormone insulin. So that's kind of like the parking pass that gets the car through the door. So literally when we're saying you've become insulin resistant, what's happening is your muscle is no longer responding to that signal properly. So now we've got this overflow glucose traffic. Some of it's maybe sneaking inside, but what do we do with that glucose traffic now that it can't get into our ideal destination? And that's where that overflow traffic can go in various directions. It can go towards our fat cells and it can be turned into fat. It can inflate our fat cells, and that's where we get obesity. It can go to our liver, and the liver can basically store it as glycogen, or it can actually turn the excess amounts into fat, which is why we're seeing an epidemic of fatty liver. And then the liver can expel that as triglyceride particles and cholesterol. So you can see that just from that, what I call a glucose traffic problem, you can get all these downstream metabolic manifestations that can present at any age. So I'd say at a high level, that's how I look at insulin resistance. But when you dig deeper, you realize there's a lot of complexity, and we can unravel that as we go along with this interview.
And just make the link from insulin sensitivity to insulin resistance to like full-blown diseases that we all know that are out there that have names that we would recognize.
Good point. So when you are insulin sensitive in an ideal situation, if we sat down and had a breakfast with some carbohydrates in it, then our muscles would be acutely sensitive to that insulin parking pass. So a good amount of the glucose, and actually in an ideal situation, about 80% of our glucose after a meal would go into the muscle, and some of that would be stored in the glucose parking lot, and some of it would be burned for energy. As we slowly become insulin resistant, what's happening is we're losing that ability. So the muscle is becoming less responsive to that insulin parking pass. And as a result of that, the glucose will gradually start to elevate. And even before the glucose elevates, you can see other changes. So let's back up before glucose issues. Sometimes what happens is with that parking problem, you might already start seeing changes in your body habitus. So you might be gaining a little bit of extra inches around the stomach. You might see some subtle changes in your liver panel or your cholesterol panel, because some of those changes might precede the glucose abnormalities by 8 to 10 years. And this is a key point that I really try to train my patients and physician colleagues on, is do not wait for the glucose to go up to identify insulin resistance. Look down at your waistline, start looking at your lipid panel early on, and look at your triglycerides, your HDL. We'll dig more deeper into that, but look for those precursors. And if you want to back up even further behind that, is look at your family history. Like, are there individual family members that have insulin resistance? Did your mom have gestational diabetes when she was pregnant? These are sort of the early things that you can look at. Now, one of the things that happens early on in life is even when our muscles are becoming a little bit insulin resistant, our body responds in a specific way to keep the glucose down. And what it does is your pancreas actually produces extra amounts of insulin. So it's like your body's producing more of that insulin parking pass, and that can overcome that early insulin resistance. So it can keep your glucose levels in good shape. But over time, think of your beta cells in the pancreas, which produce the insulin, as being a battery pack. You don't want to wear that battery out early. So if that pancreas is happening to work over time, that beta cell is going to start to burn out. And now it can't produce enough insulin to push that glucose into that muscle parking lot. So that's sort of the spectrum of starting off with insulin sensitivity, then early stage insulin resistance that can precede glucose abnormalities by 10, 15 plus years. And then if we don't intervene at that point, the pancreas starts to burn out the beta cells, and we start seeing glucose going into pre-diabetes, diabetes zones. So that's sort of the spectrum.